The convoy rumbled across the uneven dirt road, dust clouds billowing in its wake as the armored trucks made their way toward the forward base. Inside one of the vehicles sat a young woman, her rifle carefully cradled across her lap. She sat, straight-backed, her eyes sharp, scanning the barren horizon through the small slit of the window. Every bump in the road shook the truck violently, but she held her composure, steady as stone. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Collins, though few knew it yet. She had been reassigned to this sector only days before, ordered to join the sharpshooter division stationed on the edge of enemy territory. The base she was being transported to was no ordinary camp. It was a vital stronghold where supply lines converged and decisions that shifted the tide of battles were made. Soldiers stationed here were tested daily by relentless enemy fire and the harsh conditions of the land. For Sarah, this posting was not just another assignment, it was her proving ground. The truck lurched to a stop with a screech of brakes. The rear doors clanged open, and the hot, dry air swept in like a slap to the face. Dust burned her throat as she stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. Around her, soldiers moved, briskly, shouting orders, carrying crates of ammunition, and preparing defensive lines. This was no quiet outpost. It was alive with tension, the air thick with the scent of gun oil, sweat, and something heavier fear disguised beneath discipline. Sarah adjusted the strap of her rifle, feeling its weight settle on her shoulder. She didn't flinch under the curious stares that followed her arrival. Soldiers paused in their work to glance at the newcomer. Some exchanged smirks. A few whispered remarks passed between them, not subtle enough to escape her sharp hearing. "Another rookie," one muttered. "Looks like she's here to keep the paperwork straight, not to fight," another chuckled. "Sharpshooter with that frame? Good luck hitting anything beyond 10 yards, a third sneered. The words stung, but Sarah kept her expression calm, her jaw set. She knew what they saw. A woman of average build, carrying a rifle nearly as tall as she was. To them, she was out of place, a mismatch in a world hardened by mud, blood, and fire. What they didn't know, what they couldn't yet see, was the steel within her. A sergeant approached, his uniform worn, his cap tilted low over eyes that scanned her with skepticism. "Collins?" he asked sharply. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady. He gave a curt nod, glancing at the rifle slung across her back. "We'll see if you can handle that thing. Don't expect the others to cut you any slack." Without waiting for a response, he turned and barked at 2 soldiers nearby to unload supplies. Sarah moved toward the barracks assigned to her, the wooden structure creaking as she pushed the door open. Inside, bunks lined the walls, and the smell of sweat, boots, and damp uniforms filled the space. Conversations fell silent as she entered. A few men glanced up, some with mild curiosity, others with outright disdain. She set her gear on the empty bunk, quietly claiming her place. A tall, broad-shouldered private leaned back on his bed, smirking. "So you're the new sniper, huh? Thought they'd send us someone who could actually see over the sandbags." His words drew chuckles from a few others. Sarah ignored the bait. She unzipped her case, lifted her rifle with careful precision, and began to clean it. Her hands moved with practiced ease, disassembling, wiping, oiling, reassembling. The mocking laughter died down as some watched her work, noting the skill in her every movement. But still, doubt lingered in their eyes. Night fell quickly on the base, and the desert air grew cold. Sarah lay awake on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The distant sounds of gunfire echoed from beyond the ridges, each shot a reminder of the reality she now faced. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to survive, to contribute, and to prove, if only to herself, that she belonged. The following morning, reveille sounded at dawn. Soldiers shuffled out of their bunks, pulling on boots and gear. Sarah joined them, falling into line as the day's orders were given. The unit was scheduled for a routine patrol, but her assignment was different. She was sent to the observation post overlooking the valley, a test, no doubt, arranged by those who doubted her. The observation post was a narrow ridge fortified with sandbags and camouflage netting. The wind howled through the cracks, carrying dust that clung to everything it touched. Sarah settled into position, unfolding the bipod of her rifle and scanning the valley below through her scope. The land stretched wide and barren, broken only by jagged rocks and patches of dead grass. Somewhere out there, the enemy waited. Hours passed in silence. Her eyes never wavered, her breathing steady as she tracked every flicker of movement. At times, her fellow spotters grew restless, shifting or muttering complaints, but she remained still, her discipline unwavering. One soldier finally sighed. "She's wasting time. Bet she can't even tell a shadow from a man." Sarah said nothing. Her focus was absolute. Then, movement. A glint of metal caught her eye from the ridge opposite. A figure had risen briefly, careless in their concealment. Sarah's pulse quickened, but her breathing remained calm. She adjusted her scope, calculating the distance. The target was far, beyond what most would even attempt. Her finger hovered near the trigger. She didn't fire. This wasn't her mission today. But she saw the enemy. She knew where they were. And she knew, without a shred of doubt, that when the time came, her shot would not miss. By the time she returned to camp, the whispers had grown louder. Word had spread that she hadn't fired. To her comrades, it was proof of hesitation. Another reason to dismiss her. But Sarah carried the knowledge silently, her calm expression betraying nothing. She had seen the enemy. She had measured the distance. And deep inside, she knew her moment would come. For now, she remained the quiet newcomer, underestimated and doubted. But the battlefield had a way of silencing doubt. And when it did, her silence would echo louder than any of their laughter. The base awoke to the sound of boots striking dirt, mess kits clanging, and orders barked across the yard. By now, Sarah Collins had been at the front line for less than a week, yet her presence had already become a subject of endless gossip. The initial whispers about the girl with the scope had turned into open remarks, casual jabs tossed like stones in her path. Every camp had its rituals, and here the ritual was mockery. It wasn't that these soldiers were cruel by nature. It was survival. Jokes, teasing, and sarcasm were a way to mask fear, to remind themselves that they were still human in a place where death hovered like a shadow. Sarah understood that. But what stung was not the laughter itself. It was that so much of it was directed at her, always testing the limits of her silence. That morning, after roll call, the sharpshooters were gathered at the firing range, a makeshift strip of land with steel targets planted at varying distances. Sunlight glared off the metal plates, and the air shimmered with heat. One by one, the men shouldered their rifles, sending rounds cracking through the valley. The clang of bullets striking steel carried back like applause. When Sarah stepped forward, the smirks began. "Hey, someone give her a stool so she can see over the sights," one soldier jeered. Another called out, "Careful with that thing, sweetheart, you might hurt yourself." Laughter rippled through the group. Even some of the younger recruits joined in, eager to blend with the seasoned men. Sarah ignored them. She lay prone, unfolded her bipod, and settled behind her scope. The rifle became part of her body, its weight familiar and grounding. She exhaled slowly, narrowing her focus. Crack! The nearest target rang with a clean strike. A few eyebrows lifted. But the men weren't ready to give her credit. "Beginner's luck," one muttered. Crack! Crack! 2 more targets fell in quick succession. each hit centered on steel. Now the laughter faltered. A silence began to creep in thin, uncomfortable. Then came the voice of Sergeant Miller, the unit's loudest critic and self-proclaimed best shot. He stepped forward, arms crossed, his grin wide, but his eyes sharp with challenge. "Not bad," he said. "But let's see you hit that." He pointed toward a target at the farthest distance, one most men didn't even bother with unless they wanted to show off. It wasn't impossible, but the distance, wind, and glare made it a test even seasoned snipers often missed. The group chuckled again, this time with anticipation. They weren't laughing at her anymore. They were laughing at the show that was about to unfold, the rookie's failure. Sarah said nothing. She adjusted her scope, shifted her weight, and locked her cheek to the stock. The world around her dissolved until only the target remained. Her breathing slowed. She calculated the drop, the crosswind, the shimmer of heat. Crack, the sound rang out, followed by the faint but unmistakable clang of steel. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Sarah rose calmly, brushed the dust from her uniform, and slung her rifle over her shoulder. She didn't look back at the group. She didn't need to. But Sergeant Miller wasn't about to let her have the last word. His voice cut through the stunned quiet. "Not bad," he said, louder this time. "But one hit doesn't make you a sniper. Let's see you do it when the enemy's shooting back. Targets don't fire bullets." The laughter returned, though. Weaker, less certain. It wasn't victory for Sarah, but it wasn't defeat either. She had planted doubt in their doubt. That evening in the mess hall, the room buzzed with stories of the range. Every telling was exaggerated. Some claimed she'd hit the far target on the first try. Others swore she'd missed twice before landing the shot. Truth had already become legend, but none of the tailies gave her the respect she'd earned. Instead, they twisted it back into mockery. "She's got good eyesight. I'll give her that," one soldier said loudly, slamming his cup on the table. "Must be all that sewing practice back home." The room erupted in laughter. Another chimed in. "Bet she learned to shoot tin cans in her backyard. Real combat's another story." Sarah ate in silence. She didn't rise to their bait, didn't defend herself. Words wouldn't change their minds. She knew that the only thing that would silence them was proof on the battlefield. Still, she wasn't alone in her observations. In the far corner of the mess hall, Colonel Harris himself had been listening. The colonel, stoic and weathered, said nothing, but his sharp eyes studied Sarah, noting her calm demeanor amid the jeers. He had seen many soldiers break under less pressure. This one, he thought, might have something different in her. The days that followed only fueled the mockery. During drills, soldiers made a point of calling out, "Careful, don't miss," or "Need a smaller target for you." When she was assigned to patrols, some muttered that she'd only slow them down. And when she returned unscathed, they claimed it was because she hadn't done anything at all. But behind the noise, a quiet shift was happening. A few soldiers began to notice how steady she was under pressure, how disciplined her movements were, how her eyes missed nothing. They didn't admit it aloud, not yet, but doubt in their mockery had begun to grow. The turning point came one night during a storm. Lightning cracked across the sky, rain pounded the tin roofs, and the base was thrown into chaos when an enemy mortar barrage struck unexpectedly. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions, weapons raised. Amid the confusion, a sentry shouted that he had spotted enemy movement near the eastern ridge. Sarah was already in position, scope pressed against her eye, scanning through sheets of rain. While others fired blindly into the night, she tracked carefully, patiently, waiting for the glint of metal. And when it came just for a fraction of a second, she pulled the trigger. The shot cut through the storm. The enemy fire faltered. It wasn't a celebrated victory. In the chaos, most hadn't even realized it was her shot that made the difference. But Colonel Harris knew. He had been watching. By the next morning, the jokes resumed, as if nothing had changed. But beneath them, something subtle had shifted. The colonel's eyes followed her with a new kind of attention. Sergeant Miller's smirk had grown thinner, less confident. And though the laughter still echoed, it now carried a note of unease. Sarah heard it, felt it, but said nothing. She simply continued to clean her rifle, her silence more powerful than any retort. The mockery had not broken her. It had sharpened her. And though the men didn't yet realize it, each insult they threw at her was forging the calm, unshakable soldier who would one day prove them all wrong. Colonel Harris was not a man easily impressed. Years of battle had carved his face into hard lines, his eyes sharp but weary, like someone who had stared too long into fire and smoke. To his men, he was more than a commander. He was the embodiment of the battlefield itself, disciplined, unyielding, and brutally honest. Respect for him was absolute, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it 100 times over. Yet when it came to Sarah Collins, the colonel felt only doubt. He had seen her reports, the academy scores, the precision records, even the commendations that had earned her place among the sharpshooters. On paper, she looked good. Too good, almost. But Harris had learned the hard way that paper never bled, never froze under fire, never screamed when the air filled with shrapnel. Soldiers were tested only when lead flew, and until then, every number and statistic was meaningless. The mockery she endured among the men hadn't escaped his notice, either. At first, he let it be. A soldier's reputation, he believed, was something they earned themselves. If she had the steel to survive it, she'd prove it soon enough. If not, better to find out now than in the middle of combat. Still, there was something about her silence that unsettled him. Most rookies snapped back, tried to defend themselves. With bravado, Collins did not. She listened, absorbed every insult, and carried herself as though the noise around her didn't exist. Harris couldn't decide if it was arrogance or discipline. Either way, it kept him watching. The decision to test her came sooner than he expected. It was late afternoon when a scout burst into the command tent, mud splattered across his uniform, breath ragged from the sprint. "Sir, sniper nest spotted East Ridge, overlooking the supply route. We lost 2 men trying to push through." The map spread across the colonel's table suddenly became a battlefield in his mind. That ridge wasn't just high ground, it was control. Whoever held it could choke the lifeline of supplies feeding the front. If they didn't silence that nest, his entire operation would grind to a halt. Harris rubbed his temples. He had already sent his best marksmen to deal with it. They had failed. The enemy sniper was skilled, cunning, and patient. Every time one of his men peeked over cover, they were forced back by precise fire. Another attempt could mean more body bags. He looked around the tent at his officers. They offered no solutions, only tense silence. Finally, his gaze fell on her. Collins stood near the back, quiet as always, her hands clasped behind her back. She had been summoned to the briefing as an observer, nothing more. But now Harris found himself weighing a choice he would never have considered days ago. "Lieutenant Collins," he said at last, his voice low but carrying through the room. Heads turned toward her, some with disbelief, others with barely contained amusement. "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone steady. "You've heard the situation. Enemy sniper nest. We need it cleared." His words hung heavy in the air. He didn't look at her rifle. He looked at her eyes, searching for hesitation. For the briefest moment, she simply nodded. "Understood, sir." A ripple of murmurs swept through the tent. One officer leaned toward another, whispering just loud enough. He's sending her? Might as well send a prayer while he's at it. The colonel ignored them. He leaned forward, his voice sharper now. Listen carefully, Lieutenant. This isn't training. This isn't a range. That man out there is killing my soldiers. If you miss, if you freeze, it won't just cost you. It'll cost everyone. Do you understand that? I do, sir, she answered, her voice calm as stone. He studied her, looking for cracks. There were none. No flicker of fear. No trace of nervous bravado. Just focus. That silence again? The same silence that unsettled him. Reluctantly, he gave the order. Then you've got one chance. Don't waste it. Word spread through the camp faster than wildfire. By nightfall, everyone knew Collins had been chosen to take the impossible shot. Around the mess hall, soldiers traded bets most against her. Some mocked, some laughed, others pitied her. She'll never come back, one said grimly. Better start digging a fresh grave, another muttered. Even Sergeant Miller, ever the loudest, couldn't resist. When she misses, I'll be the one cleaning up her mess. Mark my words. Through it all, Sarah remained unmoved. She ate in silence, polished her rifle, and studied the maps of the ridge until every rock and contour was etched into her memory. Doubt was the camp's currency. She refused to spend it. That night, the colonel walked the perimeter, as was his habit. The base was quiet, save for the distant hum of generators and the occasional bark of a watchdog. As he passed by the barracks, he noticed a sliver of light spilling from one of the windows. Curious, he stepped closer. Inside, Collins sat alone at her bunk, her rifle disassembled on the table before her. Each piece was laid out with meticulous care. She worked slowly, deliberately, wiping and oiling every part, her movements precise and practiced. Her face was calm, almost serene, as if this ritual steadied her for what was to come. Harris lingered a moment longer, then moved on, his expression unreadable. He didn't know if she could succeed, but for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could. The following morning, the mission was set. Collins would move with a small escort to the eastern ridge, establish position, and attempt the shot. If she succeeded, the supply lines would be secured. If she failed, Harris refused to finish the thought. At dawn, the camp gathered to watch her depart. Soldiers stood in clusters, some jeering, others merely curious. Few offered encouragement. She adjusted her gear, slung her rifle, and walked toward the waiting jeep with quiet determination. Colonel Harris stood by, arms folded, his face carved from stone. As she passed, he caught her eye. Remember, he said firmly, you don't get a second chance. Make it count. Sarah gave a single nod. Yes, sir. And then she was gone. The jeep rumbling down the dirt road toward the ridge, the rising sun casting long shadows behind her. The colonel watched until the dust swallowed the vehicle from view. Around him, his men whispered, already certain of the outcome. But Harris said nothing, because for the first time, even in his doubt, he realized something he hadn't before. He wanted her to succeed. The jeep groaned as it climbed the narrow trail toward the eastern ridge, its tires grinding against loose stone. Dust clung to everything, the canvas cover, the soldier's boots, even Sarah's rifle case, which lay across her lap. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long, sharp shadows across the valley below. From this vantage point, the terrain looked unforgiving. Jagged ridges, deep ravines, and barren stretches of sand that offered no cover. It was a sniper's paradise, and a soldier's nightmare. Sarah sat silently in the back of the vehicle, her eyes scanning every contour of the land. Every rock, every patch of scrub, every shimmer of light could conceal death. She had studied the maps, memorized the terrain, but seeing it with her own eyes gave it a weight no paper could capture. The two escorts riding with her, privates, Jenkins and Alvarez, weren't shy about their skepticism. Jenkins, barely out of his teens, but already hardened by months at the front, kept shaking his head as though this mission was a waste of time. Alvarez, older and sharper-tongued, made no attempt to hide his opinion. "Hell of a joke the Colonel's playing," Alvarez muttered over the roar of the engine. "Sending you to take out the nest. You know how many of our best tried and failed?" Sarah didn't answer. She simply adjusted the strap on her helmet and kept her gaze fixed on the ridge. Jenkins smirked. "Don't worry, Alvarez. If she misses, at least the Colonel can say he tried something new. And when we haul her back, he'll have proof women don't belong in the sharpshooters." The two laughed, the sound harsh against the grinding of the Jeep. Sarah said nothing. Words would not change their minds, and she had no interest in wasting her breath. Instead, she reached for her canteen, took a slow drink, and closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She wasn't here for them. She was here for the mission. The Jeep jolted to a stop near a rocky outcrop. The ridge loomed above them, steep and uneven, its face carved by centuries of wind and erosion. Somewhere beyond those rocks, an enemy sniper waited, patient and merciless. "This is as far as we go," the driver barked. "You'll set up here. We'll stay back and cover you, if needed." Sarah climbed out, the heat pressing against her like a weight. She slung her rifle case across her back and began the climb. Jenkins and Alvarez followed reluctantly, muttering complaints with every step. The path narrowed, forcing them into single file. Sarah moved with steady precision, placing each boot carefully, her breathing controlled. At last they reached a ledge overlooking the valley. From here, the supply route stretched far below a dusty ribbon winding through the desert. The ridge across from them loomed like a wall, its crags and shadows concealing unseen eyes. Somewhere out there, the enemy sniper lay in wait, scope, trained on anything that dared move. Alvarez crouched behind a rock, peering nervously. "We should head back. This is suicide. That bastard's probably got us in his sights already." Sarah knelt slowly, unslinging her rifle case. With deliberate care, she assembled her weapon, each click of the pieces fitting together echoing louder than the wind. She unfolded the iPod, pressed her body flat against the stone, and positioned herself so her scope aligned with the opposite ridge. Through the lens, the world sharpened. Dust swirls became visible currents. Heat shimmered off rocks like waves. Shadows stretched and shifted with the rising sun. She scanned methodically, her breathing steady, searching for the telltale signs. The unnatural line of a rifle barrel, the faint glint of glass, the subtle ripple of movement. Behind her, Jenkins grew restless. "You're wasting time. He's not going to just pop his head up and wait for you." "Shut up," Alvarez hissed, though his voice shook with unease. "She knows what she's doing." Sarah tuned them both out. Her focus narrowed to the glass circle of her scope. Every instinct told her the sniper was there, watching, waiting. She could almost feel his presence, a predator hidden in plain sight. Minutes stretched into an hour. Sweat rolled down her temple, but she didn't move. Her breathing remained controlled, shallow and quiet. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, but she did not squeeze. Patience was her weapon now. At last, a flicker. Barely visible, a subtle glint of sunlight reflected off a lens, quickly withdrawn. To the untrained eye, it would have gone unnoticed. To Sarah, it was confirmation. The enemy was there. Her heart quickened, but her hands remained steady. She adjusted her scope, recalculating the distance. nearly a mile. The shot would require absolute perfection accounting for wind, elevation, and bullet drop. One mistake, one fraction of a second, and it would be over. Behind her, Jenkins sighed loudly. "See? Nothing. Just rocks. We should—" "Quiet," Sarah whispered, her voice calm but sharp. The authority in her tone silenced him instantly. Through her scope, she saw it again. The faintest movement, the shift of fabric against stone. The enemy was repositioning, confident in his concealment. Sarah exhaled slowly, steadying her breath. She tracked the movement, aligning her crosshairs just ahead, where the sniper's head would emerge. The world around her faded, the voices, the heat, even the ache in her muscles. There was only the target, the rifle, and the stillness before. The storm. Her finger curled against the trigger, pressure building slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. Every calculation, every hour of training, every insult she had endured, funneled into this single moment. Crack. The rifle roared, the recoil pressing into her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched as the glint vanished, replaced by a sudden stillness on the ridge. The echo of the shot rolled through the valley, fading into silence. Jenkins blinked, his mouth falling open. Did she just—" Alvarez leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Holy hell." "She hit him." Sarah said nothing. She kept her. Scope trained, watching for any sign of movement. None came. The nest was silent, now its threat extinguished. At last she lowered her rifle, her expression unreadable. She began to disassemble the weapon, her movements calm, deliberate, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Jenkins finally found his voice. That was impossible. No one could have made that shot. Sarah slid her rifle back into its case and stood. "Let's head back," she said simply. The return to camp was quiet. Jenkins and Alvarez, once full of smirks and mockery, now kept their eyes down, stealing glances at her with a mix of awe and unease. The jeep carried them through the dust once more, but the silence inside was different now, heavier, charged with unspoken realization. When they arrived, the camp was waiting. Word of the mission had spread, and soldiers crowded the road as the jeep rolled in. All eyes turned to Sarah as she stepped out, rifle slung casually on her shoulder. Colonel Harris stood at the front, binoculars still in hand. He had watched from afar, had seen the impossible shot with his own eyes. For the first time, the hardened veteran found himself frozen not from doubt, but from something far rarer. Respect. Sarah met his gaze briefly, then gave a crisp salute. "Target neutralized, sir." The colonel returned the salute, slowly, deliberately. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes held what his words did not: acknowledgement. Around them, the whispers began anew. But this time, they weren't mocking. They were disbelieving, awestruck, shaken to the core. Sarah walked past them, calm and silent as always. She didn't need their words. The silence she left in her. Wake spoke louder than anything they could say. The impossible assignment had been hers, and she had turned it into legend. The battlefield was rarely quiet. Even when no shots rang out, the land itself seemed to hum with tension wind scraping across jagged rocks, boots grinding on gravel, distant engines echoing off canyon walls. Yet as Sarah lay flat on the ridge, with a rifle pressed against her shoulder, the world stilled. For her, silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of focus. She adjusted the bipod a fraction of an inch, feeling the weight settle into the earth. Her cheek rested against the stock, the cold metal grounding her as her eye locked into the scope. The crosshairs swept across the barren expanse of the opposite ridge, tracing lines across shadows and stone. Jenkins fidgeted behind her, his boots scuffing nervously against the rock. Alvarez muttered a curse under his breath, scanning the horizon with binoculars. To them, This was madness, an enemy sniper, hidden somewhere out there, waiting for a mistake. To Sarah, it was exactly what she had prepared for her entire life. Her breathing slowed, deliberate, and controlled. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Each inhale measured, each exhale released with precision. It was a rhythm she had practiced countless times, a ritual that steadied her heart and sharpened her mind. Through the glass, the world magnified. She saw the shimmer of heat. Rising from the rocks, the faint flutter of dust caught in the wind, even the subtle shift of a bird gliding overhead. Every detail mattered. Every detail was a variable in the equation she carried silently in her mind. The enemy sniper was clever, no doubt. His nest was well hidden, his movements disciplined. But discipline could not erase physics. A glint of light, a brief ripple of cloth, those were betrayals, and Sarah knew how to read them. "There," she whispered, barely audible, her finger lifting to point at a shadowed crevice. Jenkins squinted. "I don't see a damn thing." "That's because you're not looking," Alvarez muttered, though his voice held unease. Sarah ignored them both. She adjusted her elevation dial, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The distance was extraordinary, just under a mile. The wind cut across the valley at a steady angle, tugging at her hair, tugging at the bullet path she now calculated in silence. Gravity, wind, humidity, even the angle of the sun, all of it, passed through her mind like numbers in a quiet ledger. Her finger brushed the trigger lightly, not yet pressing. She inhaled again, letting the air fill her lungs, then exhaled halfway and held. Her heartbeat slowed, steady and even. In that moment, she became part of the rifle. The steel, the scope, the wood, all of it was an extension of her body. She did not fight it. She flowed through it, like water through a channel carved by time. The memory of mockery rose, unbidden voices laughing, calling her a rookie, a waste, a burden. She let them echo, let them fuel her, then allowed them to dissolve into silence. Doubt had no place here. She saw the movement, subtle but undeniable. A fragment of shadow shifted in the sniper's nest, a slight tilt of glass as he searched the valley for his next target. Her crosshairs aligned. The valley seemed to hold its breath with her. Jenkins froze. Alvarez leaned closer, silent now, his skepticism giving way to awe. Even the wind seemed to hush, its howl softening into a whisper. Sarah's mind cleared. There was no past, no future, only this moment. Her pulse beat steadily in her ears, guiding her rhythm. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Her finger tightened on the trigger, not jerking, not forcing. Just a smooth, deliberate pull, crack. The rifle roared, recoil pressing into her shoulder, but her eye never left the scope. She followed the bullet in her mind's eye, a line of inevitability cutting across the valley. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just the vast emptiness between her and the ridge. Then the glint vanished. The nest stilled. Jenkins gasped. "No way. No way you just hit that." Alvarez lowered his binoculars slowly, his mouth dry. "She hit it. Dead center." "I'll be damned." But Sarah didn't celebrate. She didn't move. She kept her eye in the scope, scanning, confirming. Patience was survival. She waited a full minute, tracking the shadows, watching for any sign of return fire. There was none. Finally, she exhaled, her fingers slipping gently off the trigger. The shot was complete. The equation was solved. She lowered her rifle, her movements as calm as if she had just finished a routine drill. Her expression remained composed, unshaken. To her, it was never about proving them wrong. It was about doing what had to be done. Behind her, Jenkins was still muttering, "Impossible." It was impossible. His voice carried the tone of a man, whose entire worldview had just cracked. Alvarez, older and wiser, simply nodded. He had seen enough battles to know when he had witnessed something extraordinary. Some shots, he said softly, you only see once in a lifetime. That was one of them. Sarah said nothing. She disassembled her rifle with steady hands, cleaning it carefully before sliding it back into its case. The ritual mattered, discipline mattered. To celebrate or boast would be to break the stillness she had earned. When she rose, the valley looked different. The ridge across from her was no longer a fortress of shadows. It was silent, broken, conquered. The climb down was slow, the weight of the moment pressing on Jenkins and Alvarez more than on Sarah. They stole glances at her, their earlier mockery replaced by something they didn't want to name, respect maybe, or fear. They had seen her, hands steady when no one else's could be. They had seen her breath hold the silence of the battlefield itself. By the time they reached the jeep, the sun was high, beating down on them like a hammer. Dust swirled as the engine roared to life, carrying them back toward camp. Neither Jenkins nor Alvarez spoke on the ride. Sarah sat quietly, her rifle resting across her knees, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When the jeep rolled into base, the camp erupted with whispers. Word had already traveled too fast, too vivid to be contained. Soldiers lined the edges of the road, their eyes locked on Sarah. She stepped down calmly, boots hitting the dirt with the same quiet confidence she had carried since her arrival. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her rifle in triumph. She simply walked, steady and composed, toward the colonel. Harris stood waiting, binoculars hanging at his side. He had seen the shot with his own eyes, had watched through the scope, as she made the impossible look effortless. For a moment, he froze, not in disbelief, but in recognition. He had doubted her. They all had. And now, faced with the truth of her skill, he felt the weight of that doubt crumble. "Target neutralized, sir," she said, her salute crisp. The colonel returned it, his eyes locked on hers. "Well done, Lieutenant." The words were simple, but from Harris, they carried more weight than any medal. Around them, the soldiers whispered still, but this time their laughter was gone. What replaced it was something far more powerful: silence, heavy and undeniable. Sarah walked past them, her rifle steady on her shoulder. Every step echoed the truth of what had just happened. Her hands had not shaken. Her breath had not faltered. And the impossible was no longer impossible. The valley stretched wide and merciless, its silence broken only by the whisper of wind winding through stone. Heat shimmered off the rocks, creating illusions that danced like ghosts, fragile and fleeting. Sarah lay prone against the ridge, her body pressed flat to the earth, her rifle steady, her scope fixed. Everything else had faded. The voices of Jenkins and Alvarez no longer reached her, though they stood close behind. The hum of insects, the rasp of wind, the metallic clink of gear, all of it blurred, distant, as though wrapped in glass. Her world had narrowed to the circle of her scope, a small ring of clarity in a sea of chaos. She could see the enemy sniper. Now, or at least enough of him. A faint ripple of cloth, the subtle tilt of glass. He was patient as she was, but patience alone was not enough. In his confidence, he revealed himself. To Sarah, it was like watching a shadow breathe. She adjusted her scope a fraction, dialing in the range with the careful precision of a surgeon. Her fingers moved silently, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. Her heartbeat echoed in her chest, not frantic, but steady, controlled. She had learned long ago that fear lived in fast heartbeats, in ragged breaths. Control lived in rhythm. She inhaled deeply through her nose, let the air settle inside her lungs, then released it slowly, silently, until her body felt weightless. Her cheek pressed closer against the rifle stock, skin cool against the metal. Her left hand anchored the rifle firmly, while her right index finger rested lightly against the trigger, feeling its smooth curve. She did not squeeze, not yet. Her mind began to clear. No voices, no laughter, no doubt, only the numbers. She ran the calculations again, silently, methodically, nearly a mile in distance. Wind blowing left to right at approximately 6 miles per hour. Air dry, the morning sun angled high enough to shift shadows, but not distort line of sight. Gravity would drag the bullet in its arc, and she accounted for it instinctively, as natural as breathing. For a moment, she remembered her father. Long afternoons at the range back home, his calm voice guiding her. Don't fight the rifle, Sarah. Flow with it. Breathe with it. The shot isn't something you take. It's something you let happen. The memory faded, replaced by the sharp clarity of the present. She was not a child with a hunting rifle anymore. She was a soldier with one chance, and the weight of an entire unit depending on her. Behind her, Jenkins whispered too loudly, "What's she waiting for?" Alvarez shushed him, though his voice trembled. "Quiet, look at her. She's locked in." But Sarah didn't hear them. To her, the world had slowed. The enemy sniper shifted again, unaware of the eyes fixed on him. A glint of light betrayed the lens of his scope, catching the sun for just an instant. It was all she needed. Her breath steadied. In through the nose, out through the mouth. On the third exhale, she let her lungs half empty and held. Her body stilled completely, no tremor, no twitch, no wasted motion. The silence deepened, pressing in from all sides. Her finger curled slowly, evenly, on the trigger. She could feel every grain of pressure building, the trigger's resistance a familiar dance. Not yet, not until every part of her aligned. Her eye sharpened against the scope. She could see the faint outline of his helmet now, the ridge of his cheek, the intent in his posture as he prepared to fire again on unsuspecting soldiers far below. One breath, she thought. One heartbeat. One shot. Her body felt suspended in time, as if gravity itself had paused to watch. She could sense her pulse in her fingertips, in her chest, in her ears. It was no longer fast. It was a drumbeat, steady and sure. Jenkins shifted nervously behind her, whispering something else, but Sarah no longer existed in the same world. As him, she existed in a world where only the shot mattered. Her vision tunneled further. Crosshairs met the space just ahead of the sniper's temple. Her finger pressed, smooth, gentle, unwavering. In that final instant before the shot, she felt it the same silence she had felt only a handful of times in her life. A silence not born of absence, but of presence. The silence of absolute focus, of certainty, of inevitability. The wind ceased to matter. The heat ceased to matter. Even her own doubts ceased to matter. There was no Sarah, no enemy, no battlefield. There was only the rifle, the bullet, and the space between them. She squeezed. Time shattered. The rifle cracked, its recoil pressing into her shoulder, grounding her back into reality. The sound tore across the valley, bouncing off cliffs and stone like thunder. Birds scattered in the distance. Dust kicked up from nearby rocks. Through her scope, she saw it all unfold in a heartbeat. The enemy sniper jolted back, his rifle slipping from his grasp. His head slumped forward, the lens of his scope cracking under the force of the impact. Then stillness, complete and final. Sarah held her breath a moment longer, confirming. She scanned the ridge carefully, checking for any sign of movement. None came. The nest was silent. She exhaled, long and slow. Behind her, Alvarez let out a low whistle, his voice hushed with awe. That was the cleanest shot I've ever seen. Jenkins, pale and wide-eyed, stammered. She It was impossible. Nobody could have. His voice trailed off, disbelief weighing every syllable. Sarah lowered her rifle slowly, her expression calm, unreadable. To her, it wasn't about the impossible. It wasn't about the whispers, or the laughter, or the doubt. It was about the silence before the shot, the clarity that came when everything else fell away. She began disassembling her rifle with the same methodical care she always showed, wiping it clean, ensuring every piece was returned to its place. There was no rush, no fanfare. To her, discipline mattered more than applause. When she finally rose, slinging the rifle over her shoulder, she glanced once more at the ridge. It stood empty now, a reminder not of the enemy who had occupied it, but of the silence she had carried into the shot. Alvarez met her gaze, his own filled with something. New respect. Jenkins avoided her eyes, unable to reconcile his doubts with what he had just witnessed. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence spoke for her. As they made their way back toward the jeep, the valley seemed to echo with that silence still, as though the earth itself remembered the moment. Back at camp, the colonel would freeze when he learned of it. The soldiers would whisper in awe. But for Sarah, it was simple. It had been one breath, one heartbeat, one shot, and the silence before it all. The jeep rattled along the dirt road, its wheels spitting dust into the morning air. In the back seat, Jenkins sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground as though it held answers to questions he couldn't ask. Alvarez leaned back, arms folded, silent in a way that carried weight. Sarah rode with her rifle across her lap, calm as ever, eyes fixed on the horizon. None of them spoke. The silence was heavier than the roar of the engine. Every bump in the road jostled Jenkins, but he hardly noticed. His mind replayed the shot over and over the moment her rifle cracked, the impossible distance, the stillness that followed. He wanted to dismiss it, to find some excuse, but there was none. He had seen it. Alvarez had seen it. And now, no matter how much he tried, he could not bury the truth. She had done what no one else could. Alvarez finally broke the silence. That wasn't just luck. Jenkins didn't reply. That was discipline, Alvarez continued, his tone quiet but certain. Control. I've seen plenty of good shots, plenty of sharpshooters who thought they were untouchable. But what she did, that was something else. Jenkins swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to argue, to cling to the disbelief, but the words stuck. All he could manage was, it was impossible. Sarah didn't turn, didn't comment. Her eyes remained on the horizon, her face unreadable. She didn't need their words. She didn't need their acceptance. What mattered was the mission, and the fact that the sniper's nest was no longer a threat to the men and women depending on her. When the jeep rolled into camp, the silence shattered. Dozens of soldiers had gathered along the dirt road, their eyes sharp with curiosity. Word had traveled fast, too fast. Stories always did. Someone had spotted the impossible shot from afar. Someone else had whispered it into the mess hall. And now the camp buzzed with anticipation, men and women craning their necks to see the sharpshooter who had pulled the trigger. The jeep slowed. Sarah stepped down, her boots crunching into the gravel. For a moment, the crowd held its breath, watching her. She walked with her rifle slung casually across her shoulder, her posture steady, her pace measured. There was no swagger, no arrogance, only calm. Jenkins climbed out behind her, still pale, and Alvarez followed, his gaze flicking between the crowd and Sarah, as if daring anyone to doubt her. The whispers spread. She hit it? From that distance? No way. You're exaggerating. Ask Jenkins. Ask Alvarez. They saw it. Heads turned. Jenkins froze under their stares. His usual smirk, his easy bravado, had deserted him. Alvarez gave a single nod, his voice carrying above the murmurs. She hit it, clean. The whispers turned into a wave of disbelief, then awe. Soldiers exchanged wide-eyed looks, shaking their heads, muttering words like impossible and unbelievable. Yet the truth was undeniable. Colonel Harris stepped forward from the command tent, binoculars still dangling from his neck. He had been watching from a distance, had seen the shot strike true, and yet part of him still struggled to believe. He approached with the deliberate pace of a man weighing every step. Sarah halted before him, her expression calm, her salute crisp. "Target neutralized, sir." The colonel stared at her for a long moment. His jaw tightened, then loosened. He raised his hand and returned the salute, slow and deliberate. Around them, the soldiers fell silent, watching. The colonel's approval carried weight heavier than any cheer. "Well done," he said simply. The words were plain, but the tone carried an authority that silenced even the deepest skeptics. Sarah gave a short nod and stepped back, her duty done. But the camp was not done with her. Soldiers moved closer, some trying to catch her eye, others whispering among themselves. Jenkins kept his head down, unable to meet their gaze, while Alvarez stood straighter, pride glinting faintly in his expression. That night, the campfire stories began. In the mess hall, over plates of rations, soldiers leaned across tables and retold the shot as though they had all witnessed it firsthand. "She nailed him in one go," one said, eyes wide. "Didn't even flinch," another added. By the time the story spread to the far tents, it had already grown taller, the distance exaggerated, the conditions harsher, the silence more profound. But no matter how the details shifted, the core remained the same. Sarah Collins had done the impossible. Jenkins sat in the corner of the mess hall, staring into his untouched food. He could feel the weight of the stares on him, soldiers asking with their eyes if it was true. His pride, once so loud, now suffocated him. He wanted to deny it, to call it luck or chance, but every time he opened his mouth, the memory of the shot silenced him. Alvarez, on the other hand, spoke when asked, his words firm and measured. "I've seen plenty of sharpshooters," he told a group of young recruits, but none with hands that steady or breath that calm. "She didn't take that shot, she owned it." The recruits listened, wide-eyed, hanging on every word. For them, Sarah became something more than a soldier. She became proof that discipline could defy doubt, that skill could silence ridicule. Meanwhile, Sarah herself sat alone by her tent, methodically cleaning her rifle under the pale glow of a lantern. She didn't join the chatter, didn't bask in the attention. Her focus was the same as it had always been: discipline, precision, readiness. For her, the mission was not a stage, and respect was not a prize. She sought neither. Yet the shift was undeniable. By the next morning, soldiers who had once scoffed at her presence now nodded respectfully as she passed. Some saluted. Others simply moved aside, their silence a greater acknowledgment than words could offer. Jenkins avoided her, his pride too, bruised to confront, while Alvarez carried himself with quiet satisfaction, as though proud to have been a witness. Colonel Harris, hardened and rarely expressive, found himself lingering on her more than once, not just as a soldier, but as proof that his assumptions had been wrong. It unsettled him, but it also humbled him. The impossible target had been struck. The colonel's doubt had been silenced. The camp's mockery had turned into whispers of awe. Sarah had not only hit her mark, she had changed everything. The days after the shot unfolded like the calm after a storm. The camp was still the same tents flapping in the desert wind, soldiers moving through drills, engines rumbling in the motor pool, but something intangible had shifted. Sarah could feel it in the way eyes lingered on her as she passed. She could sense it in the silence that trailed her, a silence not of doubt, but of reverence. She didn't seek it. Each morning she rose before the others, cleaned her rifle with meticulous care, and ran through her routines. Discipline remained her anchor. To her, respect was a byproduct, not a goal. Yet everywhere she turned, the air was heavy with the story of what she had done. At breakfast, young recruits leaned closer when she walked into the mess hall, whispering as if in the presence of something larger than life. "That's her," they said softly. "The one who made the shot." Veterans nodded to her, not with words, but with subtle gestures, small acknowledgments from men and women who understood what it meant to face the impossible and prevail. Jenkins kept his distance. His pride, once a sharp blade, had dulled to silence. He avoided her gaze, his shoulders slouched as though carrying a weight he couldn't set down. The others had stopped listening to his smirks and doubts. Where once his voice carried authority among the soldiers, it now sounded hollow. Alvarez, however, had grown louder, not in arrogance, but in admiration. He told the story often, too. Anyone who asked, but never with exaggeration. She didn't flinch, he would say, his voice firm. Didn't rush. It was like she knew the bullet had already found its mark before she even pulled the trigger. His retellings weren't. For her, Sarah didn't need them. They were for the camp, for the recruits, for the men who needed to believe in something beyond themselves. One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the desert horizon, Colonel Harris called her to his quarters. His tent was sparse, maps spread. Across the central table, lanterns casting flickering shadows on the canvas walls. He looked up as she entered, his stern face unreadable. "Lieutenant Collins," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat, posture straight, eyes steady. The colonel studied her for a long moment, the silence between them thick. Finally, he spoke. "I've led men and women in battles. Longer than you've been alive. I've seen bravery, skill, and sacrifice. But I've also seen arrogance, overconfidence, and failure. Do you know why I doubted you?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Because you thought discipline belonged to men who looked like you, not to women like me." The colonel didn't react immediately. Then, slowly, his lips twitched into something that almost resembled a smile. "You're not wrong." He leaned forward, his hands folded atop the table. "But when I watched you on that ridge..." "When?" "I saw the calm in your shot. I realized something. I wasn't doubting you. I was doubting myself. Doubting that I could recognize greatness when it didn't wear the face I expected." Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. The colonel continued. "What you did out there will be told in this camp long after we're gone. You've changed. The way these men see you. Hell, you've changed the way I see you." He rose then, his posture still straight, but somehow lighter. "Stand, Lieutenant," Sarah bade. Colonel Harris saluted her. Not the casual salute of a superior, acknowledging an inferior, but the full, deliberate salute of a soldier honoring another soldier. His hand lingered at his brow for a moment longer than custom demanded. Sarah returned the salute, her expression calm, but in her chest she felt the weight of the moment. "Respect," the colonel said quietly, lowering his hand, "isn't given. It's earned, and you've earned more than anyone here." She nodded once. "Thank you, sir." When she stepped out of the tent, the night had settled across the camp. Lanterns glowed faintly, and soldiers moved quietly between shadows. Yet as she walked, heads turned, and the whispers rose again, not mocking, not doubting, but carrying. A reverence she hadn't asked for, but had nonetheless claimed. By the fire pits, soldiers paused their conversations. In the training yard, recruits straightened as she passed. The camp, once skeptical, now carried itself differently in her presence. But Sarah didn't linger in their attention. She returned. To her tent, sat with her rifle, and began the familiar ritual of cleaning it, piece by piece, cloth running over steel until it gleamed. Discipline didn't end with one victory. It was built every day, in silence, when no one was watching. That night, as she lay in her cot, she reflected not on the shot, not on the colonel's salute, not even on the newfound respect. She reflected on the silence before the shot, the clarity it brought her, the stillness that had always been her strength. That silence was hers alone, and in that silence she found peace. The next morning, the camp awoke to drills and orders, the routines of war resuming as always. But the atmosphere had changed. Soldiers trained harder. Recruits watched Sarah with eyes sharp with inspiration, and even hardened veterans carried themselves with renewed conviction. The impossible had been done, and in its shadow, doubt seemed smaller. Sarah walked among them, rifle slung at her side, her expression calm. She didn't need to speak. Her silence carried more weight than words ever could. By week's end, orders arrived for the unit to move forward. Another campaign, another ridge, another set of dangers. The war hadn't ended because of one shot, but that single moment had given them something more enduring than victory. It had given them belief. When the convoy rolled out, Sarah rode in the lead jeep, her gaze fixed on the horizon once more. She knew there would be more whispers, more doubters in new camps, more impossible moments waiting in the dust and wind. And she knew she would meet them all the same way she had met the last. Steady hands, steady breath, and silence before the shot. For now, though, the camp behind her buzzed with a new legend. Not one born of boasts or bravado, but of quiet discipline and unshakable resolve. A legend that would ripple outward, carried in whispers through the ranks, across battlefields, and beyond. The enemy had mocked her scope skills. Her comrades had doubted her. Even the colonel had frozen when the truth struck. But Sarah Collins had never needed their belief. She had needed only the silence, the rifle, and herself. Respect had not been given. It had been earned in silence.